Have you ever reached a point where life felt too heavy? Where English wasn't just a language but a reminder of everything you failed to become? This is the story of how I moved to Denmark with hope, but instead found loneliness, silence, and a child I never planned for. A living mirror reflecting every fear I tried to hide. If you feel tired, lost, or unchosen by life, maybe this video was meant for you. The unexpected life shift. Imagine you wake up one morning and feel like life quietly moved you to a different chapter without asking for your signature. That was my first real memory in Denmark. A cold morning, gray sky, and a silent room where everything felt new, expensive, beautiful, and terrifying at the exact same time. You know that strange feeling when your brain whispers, "Wait, I did not choose this, right?" It was like my life suddenly pressed the unexpected update button, and I had no idea how to cancel or uninstall it. I came to Denmark with dreams, simple ones: learn English better, build a peaceful life, and understand who I really wanted to become. But life, with its funny personality, decided to hand me a new mission. Caring for a child I never planned for in a country far from everything familiar. You may think that adults always know what they are doing, but trust me, sometimes we are just taller children trying not to cry in the wrong place. Denmark was beautiful, yes, but beauty doesn't remove confusion. I still remember my first walk on the quiet Danish street. Everyone looked calm, like they had personal subtitles floating above their heads, explaining every thought and decision. Meanwhile, I was walking like a confused tourist inside my own life, trying to pronounce reality correctly. I asked myself many times, is this a blessing, a challenge, or a punishment for something I did not even remember doing? My heart did not answer immediately. But here is the interesting part. Psychology calls moments like this identity disruption. When a sudden new role appears, the brain loses stability because the mental map no longer matches the environment. In simple English, when life changes too fast, your brain acts like a phone that keeps asking, "Reboot now? Yes or yes?" That uncomfortable pressure is not weakness. It is your brain trying to protect you. The more I learned about it, the more I realized that maybe life was not destroying me, but upgrading me very slowly, and without releasing the patch notes. So I stood there in Denmark staring at my new life like an unopened gift box. I did not know if it contained a dream, a lesson, or a long-term emotional earthquake. But deep inside, something whispered, maybe I need to walk through this, not away from it. And that moment became the first quiet door that opened, even when I was not ready. Danish winter and silent tears. Try to imagine this. You step into a country where the air feels clean, the houses look perfect, the bicycles move like silent shadows, and everyone seems to know exactly where they belong. Except you. That was my Denmark. The first winter hit me like a slow emotional freezer. Not dramatic, not violent, just cold enough to slip under my skin and quietly replace my confidence with doubt. People often say Scandinavia is the land of hygge, warm lights, soft blankets, and calm happiness. But when your heart is unprepared, even the most beautiful place can feel like a museum, stunning, but not yours. My tears didn't fall loudly. They were not movie-style tears. They were the kind that appeared at midnight when heating was expensive, English vocabulary felt limited, and even Google Translate sounded tired. Psychology calls this type of sadness emotional isolation, where your brain believes you are surrounded by humans, but disconnected from all of them. To put it simply, you feel like furniture, visible but not understood. Every time I heard Danish conversations around me, it felt like my ears were holding a locked door, and no language key was available. And let me tell you something funny. Even the wind in Denmark sounds like it speaks better English than I did. There was one memory that still follows me. I was standing at a bus stop at 4 p.m., but it already looked like midnight. The sky was dark. People looked serious, and the silence was heavy enough to make my thoughts echo back to me. I whispered, "Why am I here? What if I can't do this? What if I'm not enough?" The bus arrived, but I didn't get on. Not because I missed it, but because my courage arrived slower than public transportation. Research from the University of Copenhagen shows that long periods of silence, darkness, and cultural distance can trigger identity fog, a mental state where you cannot describe who you are, only who you used to be. And trust me, nothing hurts more than not recognizing your own emotional reflection. It feels like your soul is buffering and the progress bar is stuck at 7%. But here is the twist my heart wasn't ready for. Sometimes winter is not the season that kills your hope. It is the season that forces your inner fire to prove it exists. The silence became my emotional teacher, the darkness became my mirror, and loneliness became my unofficial English tutor. Because when you have nobody to talk to, you start talking to yourself, slowly, and with better grammar. The child I never chose. Here is something nobody warns you about. Life can place a tiny human in front of you and expect your heart to know what to do automatically, like some emotional software that magically installs itself. But love doesn't always download on command. The day I met that child, small hands, curious eyes, innocent smile, my brain froze like an app with too many background tabs running. I knew nothing about raising a child, especially not in a foreign country where English felt like my second-hand tool, not a safe instrument for teaching, guiding, or loving. People say children are gifts, but gifts feel different when you're not sure you deserve them, or when you're afraid you'll break them. Imagine holding responsibility in your arms while your heart whispers, "I'm not ready. I didn't choose this." It was not rejection. It was fear dressed as distance. Psychologists call it emotional misalignment. When your situation arrives before your emotional capacity, it feels like standing on a stage without rehearsing, while the audience expects perfection. And the ironic part? Children can sense tension before they understand language. That child didn't speak much, but the eyes were fluent in sensing hesitation, fluent in reading the unspoken sentence. "I don't know how to love you correctly while ye night." When the house was quiet, guilt and fear did a duet inside my head. My biggest worry wasn't about feeding, bathing, or babysitting. My biggest fear was, what if I love incorrectly? What if my broken English creates a broken childhood memory? When you grow up in a culture where adults are expected to know everything, admitting confusion feels like failure, not honesty. But the truth is, love isn't a natural instinct for everyone. Sometimes it is a language you must learn like English, slowly, gently, and without judging your own grammar. There was a small moment that stayed in my memory. The child was trying to say something in English but got stuck mid-sentence, frustrated. I wanted to help, but my vocabulary was also shaking like an old bicycle on a frozen Danish street. We sat there, two humans, two different ages, same emotional sentence. I want to say it, but I don't know how. That silence between us wasn't empty. It was a classroom neither of us signed up for, but somehow both needed. Maybe love isn't always born naturally. Maybe it grows when two unfinished people practice staying, even when leaving feels easier. Broken English and broken confidence. If you have ever tried speaking a language that your mouth wasn't emotionally ready for, you will understand this part of the story without needing subtitles. My English at that time wasn't terrible, but it wasn't alive either. It was like using a flashlight with low battery, bright enough to see shapes but not enough to feel safe. Every conversation felt like a small exam, every sentence like a puzzle, and every mistake like a public crime. The strange thing is, when your English feels weak, your confidence doesn't just weaken. It collapses like a cheap camping tent in a Danish storm. I wasn't just scared of grammar. I was scared of being misunderstood, judged, or labeled as not enough. Scientists from the field of cognitive linguistics call this phenomenon linguistic self-esteem. Your sense of worth becomes tied to how well you speak, not who you are. And trust me, when your tongue hesitates, your brain can become a very dramatic storyteller. If I cannot speak well, I cannot teach. If I cannot teach, I cannot care. If I cannot care, maybe I am not meant to be here. Sounds ridiculous, right? But emotions don't care about logic. They behave like toddlers throwing tantrums in the middle of a supermarket. When communicating with that child, I felt like a student pretending to be a teacher. I wanted to say comforting things like, "I'm here. You're safe. We will learn together." But what came out was a slower, less confident version, like my feelings were wearing second-hand shoes. And here lies the cruel comedy. The child was never judging me. I was the only judge, jury, and executioner in my own emotional courtroom. Meanwhile, society loves to say, "Just speak. Don't worry." As if anxiety listens to motivational slogans, there was a specific moment that tattooed itself onto my memory. One evening, I tried reading an English bedtime story. The room was warm, the lamp soft, the child waiting with innocent excitement, and then I stumbled on a word. Not even a difficult one, a basic one. But that stumble triggered a chain reaction inside my mind, like knocking over the first domino of insecurity. I paused, smiled awkwardly, repeated the word, corrected myself, and continued reading. The child didn't care, but I did. My heart whispered, "See? You can't even read smoothly." But here's the twist. According to neuropsychology, the brain learns faster during emotional vulnerability, because that's when it becomes fully present. Meaning, my insecurity wasn't a sign of failure. It was proof that I cared deeply. And caring, not perfection, is the real beginning of growth. That night, after the child slept, I made a silent promise, not to speak perfect English, but to never let fear be the loudest voice in the room again. The fire moment in a playground. Here's the strange thing about life. Sometimes the biggest emotional turning points don't happen in dramatic movie scenes, but in the most ordinary places. Like a playground on a cold Danish afternoon, surrounded by tiny shoes, wet grass, and the smell of winter air mixed with children's laughter. That day, I didn't expect anything meaningful to happen. I was tired, mentally disorganized, and secretly wishing for an easy escape from everything I felt unqualified for. The sky looked like a huge gray blanket, the kind that covers your motivation instead of keeping you warm. The child was running around trying to climb a small wooden structure, and I stood there watching like an accidental guardian, still unsure how to exist correctly. Then it happened. The child fell. Not dramatically, not dangerously, but enough to shock those little lungs and trigger tears. A very normal moment for the world, but not for me. Because instinctively I ran, lifted the child, and whispered in slow, shaky English, "I'm here. You're okay. I won't leave." And for the first time ever, those words didn't feel like a language exercise. They felt like truth. The child stopped crying, not because my English was perfect, but because my presence was real. That was the exact second I understood something that would change me forever. Love does not require permission, fluency, or readiness. It just requires arrival. Psychology calls this emotional ignition, a moment where responsibility transforms from pressure into purpose. My brain, which had spent months defending itself with excuses, suddenly realized that love is not about planning. It is about responding. Children don't need perfect grammar. They need emotional safety. Science even proves that a child's nervous system calms faster when the adult voice is slow, steady, and honest, exactly the rhythm of someone still learning the language. Meaning my weakness was unintentionally the perfect teaching tool. After that mini fall, the child held my sleeve tightly, as if saying without words, "I choose you even if you didn't choose me." And my heart answered silently, maybe I was chosen because I needed to learn how to love, not because I already knew. Something shifted inside me, not loudly, not instantly. More like a tiny flame appearing in a cold room. No one else noticed, but I did. For the first time, I didn't feel like a visitor in my own story. I felt like someone life trusted with a mission I hadn't understood until that moment. And that's when I finally realized, love is not built by perfect timing. It is built by imperfect people who decide to stay. Training English like a parent. Here's a funny truth nobody teaches in English textbooks. The fastest way to learn a language is not by memorizing vocabulary, repeating after YouTube teachers, or collecting grammar rules like Pokemon cards. It's by needing the language to care for someone. After that day on the playground, I slowly changed how I practiced English. I stopped learning like a student and started learning like a parent, slow, patient, simple, and meaningful. Instead of asking, "How can I speak better?" I asked, "How can my words make this child feel safe, seen, and understood?" That small shift changed everything. When you talk to a child, you don't use complicated sentences, fancy expressions, or academic tone. You speak slowly, clearly, warmly, and with real emotion. And that style is exactly how the human brain learns languages best. According to neuroscience, the brain remembers information longer when it is connected to safety, repetition, and emotional bonding. So every bedtime story, every breakfast conversation, every tiny moment like, "Do you want juice?" or "Are you okay?" became free English lessons that no school could ever sell. Suddenly, English wasn't homework. English was love in slow motion. One day, I tried something new. Instead of practicing English alone in my room, I practiced it with the child. We learned names of toys, colors of jackets, sounds of animals, even shapes of clouds. The living room became our language studio. The kitchen became our pronunciation gym. And the playground became our listening lab. I learned to speak with gestures, facial expressions, and tone, because children don't care if your grammar is wrong. They care if they feel safe in your voice. And here's the surprise ending. My English improved faster than ever before. Not because I studied more, but because I felt responsible for using the language with love. When you must speak to protect, comfort, or teach someone, your brain automatically strengthens memory, clarity, and emotional vocabulary. Research calls it purpose-driven learning, but I call it learning with heart power. If you are struggling with English, maybe the problem is not your brain. Maybe you are learning without emotional meaning. Don't chase perfect sentences. Chase meaningful ones. Your English doesn't need to sound like a Hollywood actor. It only needs to sound like someone who cares. Scientific love and language growth. Let me tell you a secret that sounds like poetry but is actually science wearing a cozy sweater. The human brain learns language faster when it feels emotionally safe, socially connected, and purpose-driven. Not when it sits alone with grammar books like a prisoner doing quiet homework. According to cognitive neuroscience, your brain has two main learning modes: survival mode and growth mode. And here's the twist: you cannot learn effectively when your mind is busy defending itself. When fear is loud, memory is silent. When shame rises, comprehension falls. When loneliness grows, vocabulary shrinks. That's why so many adults study English for years but still can't speak, while children speak without studying. Not because they are smarter, but because they feel safe experimenting with mistakes. Love, connection, and emotional warmth activate a brain region called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which increases both language retention and emotional regulation. Basically, when you feel loved, your brain becomes a sponge. When you feel judged, it becomes a brick. That explains why my English improved not in classrooms, but next to a child who just wanted someone to stay. I wasn't speaking to impress. I was speaking to comfort, protect, and reassure. And ironically, that turned into the most natural language course life could offer. There's a concept called co-regulation, where two nervous systems help each other return to calm without using perfect words, just tone, presence, and rhythm. That's exactly what happened between me and that child. I didn't just teach English, I translated safety. The child didn't just listen to English, they absorbed trust. And trust, my friend, is better than any grammar rule. It turns out love doesn't just build families. It builds fluent sentences, confident pronunciation, emotional intelligence, and long-term memory. Love is the ultimate teacher because it never says, "Hurry up." It whispers, "Take your time. I'm here." Maybe that's why my broken English finally started sounding like real communication. Not because it became perfect, but because it became alive. So if you ever feel stuck learning English, ask yourself, are you studying with fear or learning with care? Your brain is not failing, it is only waiting to feel safe enough to grow. How I finally loved and spoke. And then one quiet morning in Denmark, everything slowly came together. Not magically, not perfectly, but steadily, like sunlight sneaking through frosted windows. I realized that love and language are surprisingly similar. Both need patience, presence, and repeated practice. That child who once reflected every doubt and fear I carried, now looked at me with trust and curiosity. My English, once broken and hesitant, began to flow naturally, carrying emotions and warmth instead of just words. I was no longer a teacher pretending to know. I was a human learning to love and speak at the same time. It wasn't about grammar anymore. It wasn't about vocabulary lists or flawless pronunciation. It was about showing up consistently and gently for someone who depended on me, and, in the process, for myself. The smallest conversations became practice fields for language, empathy, and patience. A bedtime story, a question about the weather, even laughing together at silly mistakes. All became lessons I could never have found in a classroom. Neuroscience backs this up. Emotionally meaningful interactions enhance long-term memory, improve speech fluency, and even strengthen neural connections in areas related to social intelligence. In other words, my heart's work made my brain grow. There were many tiny victories along the way. The first sentence the child said completely on their own, the first time I responded without hesitation, the first moment I laughed at my mistakes instead of panicking. Each small success reinforced the truth I had slowly learned. Love teaches faster than fear ever could, and practice rooted in care sticks longer than practice rooted in pressure. I no longer measured my progress by perfection. I measured it by connection, understanding, and presence. And that's when it hit me: you can't always choose the life you get, but you can choose how you respond to it. That unplanned child, the cold Danish streets, my shaky English, they were not obstacles. They were teachers. They were the classroom I never signed up for, but that I desperately needed. And now both my heart and my words felt free to speak, to comfort, and to grow. This journey taught me something profound. Sometimes the best way to learn a language or to love is to do it slowly, imperfectly, and with total presence. You don't need to be ready. You just need to show up.